Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here with us at today's hearing entitled Fact Check, an end-of-year review on accountability at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I want to welcome our first and only panel to the table this morning. With us is Deputy Secretary Sloan Gibson for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and he is accompanied by Meghan Flanz, who is the Deputy General Counsel for Legal Operations and Accountability at the VA. We thank both of you for being here this morning, and I want to get straight to the witness's testimony, and Ms. Brown is running a little bit behind, so I'm going to allow Sloan to give his testimony before we give our opening statement. So, Mr. Gibson, you're recognized now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me get right to the point. In my many years in the private sector, I've never encountered an organization where leadership was measured by how many people you fired. And there's a simple reason for that. You can't fire your way to excellence. I can promise you that a large and complex customer service organization will never deliver a great customer service experience, will never consistently deliver great outcomes if employees are living in constant fear of being punished for making a mistake. When enforcing discipline is the central element of accountability, an organization will not deliver sustained excellence. Now, having said all of that, consequences for behavior that is inconsistent with our values is part of effective leadership. In those cases, we pursue disciplinary action appropriate to the offense and supported by evidence. I am committed, and VA senior leadership is committed to taking those actions. We've asked this committee to be one of our most important partners in the forward-looking transformation of the department. We are all after the same ultimate objective, improving care and benefit outcomes for veterans. The only way we can achieve that shared objective is through strong forward-looking leadership based upon what Bob and I call sustainable accountability. That's accountability that results in positive veteran outcomes, not just in the near term, but also in the long term. It's supervisors that are providing routine feedback to subordinates, recognizing what's going well and coaching where improvements are necessary. It's ensuring all employees understand how daily work supports our mission, values, and strategy. It's training leaders to lead and employees to exceed veterans' expectations every day. It means making things right for veterans quickly and responsively and learning from mistakes, understanding what went wrong, and then fixing it. It's candidly assessing performance based upon merit and achievements and rewarding exceptional results. And it's taking corrective action when warranted and supported by evidence. We have all of that. We have sustainable accountability, the same comprehensive notion of accountability that you find in virtually every high-performing organization in the private sector. I've often said that if VA was in the private sector, it would be a Fortune 10 company. Making enduring cultural and fundamental process changes in an enterprise of that size and complexity takes time. It takes persistence and some amount of patience. But investments in sustainable accountability are already paying off in improved veteran outcomes. Let me give you a very important example. SAIL, S-A-I-L, Strategic Analytics for Improvement and Learning. SAIL is a tool that we use to measure veteran healthcare outcomes at every VA medical center. Measures around quality, safety, and efficiency, among others. Shortly after I arrived at VA, I learned about SAIL and looked into the correlation between hospital directors' performance ratings and the healthcare outcomes being delivered by their facilities as measured in SAIL. Here's what I found. Stellar performance ratings at some of the lowest performing facilities. So beginning in October of 2014, we integrated veteran healthcare outcomes as measured in SAIL into every single medical center director's performance objectives. What happened? Well, for starters, SAIL became one of the most widely used management tools in the department. That tells you something to begin with. And roughly 60% of VA medical centers improved the healthcare outcome for veterans over the course of the year. How good is SAIL? The chief medical officer at one of the largest healthcare organizations in America told me that if he had SAIL in his organization, he'd implement it tomorrow. That's sustainable accountability, delivering better outcomes for veterans, not just right now, but for the long term. I suspect Bob and I visited more VA facilities, spoken to more veterans and VA employees in the last 18 months than any pair of top VA leaders in the department's history. We find employees, as we are out there, who care about the mission, who want to do the right thing, and who work hard every day to serve veterans. Yet if we take rhetoric as fact, then particularly as it relates to scheduling and access, VA is rife with corruption. To review the record, of the more than 100 investigations the IG launched based on the access field audit that we conducted last year, to date we've received reports and evidence relating to 77 of those. The IG substantiated intentional misuse of scheduling or other access data at 6 sites. In our follow-up, we substantiated misuse at 4 other sites, and we're reviewing evidence at 2 more. So far, some 20 employees have been implicated and 20 disciplinary actions have been taken, from reprimand to removal. While our work is not done, and those numbers will change, it's not the widespread corruption and fraud pitched to veterans and the American people. But as we see it, if one veteran is not well served, we own it, and we will work to fix it. The IG still owes us the remaining reports. We appreciate their work, but we can't let issues languish unresolved while waiting for protracted IG or Department of Justice investigations for months and sometimes even years. Our past practice has been to wait for these investigations to be complete. We're done waiting. Where we can collect relevant evidence more quickly and effectively with VA resources, we will do so. Then, where evidence warrants disciplinary action, we'll take action. If new evidence warranting additional action is presented later, we'll take additional action. Where necessary, employees under investigation will be detailed to other duties, not routinely placed on administrative leave. Administrative leave will be reserved on a by-exception basis set for only those extreme circumstances. Let me shift to the recent IG report on relocation, which has garnered widespread attention. We agree with many of the process-related findings, and we've already made changes to address those issues. What's disturbing and indicative of the atmosphere in which we now operate is the gulf between the rhetoric in the IG report and the actual evidence. In the most important finding, the report concludes that 2 executives were coerced to relocate. The fact is that both executives testified under oath repeatedly, 16 times in one instance, that they initiated talks leading to relocation. Neither provided any testimony consistent with a finding of coercion. The report and the associated press release emphasized criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. Yet, as I have reviewed the evidence as collected by the IG, it does not support one violation of law, not one violation of rule, not even one violation of regulation related to relocation expenses. The easy option for me would have been to propose removal. That's what everybody wanted. I didn't come to VA to do the easy thing. I came here to do the right thing. I did not find that the evidence supported an ethical violation. If I had, I'd have removed the 2 executives. I did find that evidence supported a failure in judgment, and therefore my decision was to propose demotion from the senior executive service, including a substantial reduction in pay. Rumor mills may have reported that we're negotiating some sort of settlement. Not true. The fact is that we withdrew the demotion action because of our administrative error, and we've already reinstated the action. We want to make sure that all actions, including these, survive appeal. I'll close with a very short story. Last Thursday at our Denver Medical Center's mental health clinic, a veteran took nurse practitioner Kathy Rittenhouse hostage. Armed with a loaded pistol and 2 boxes of ammunition, the veteran's stated purpose was to be killed by police, suicide by cop. Evidenced and highly trained, Kathy calmed the veteran, persuaded him to let her make a phone call. When VA police officer Greg Crenshaw arrived, Greg persuaded the veteran to take him as the hostage to protect Kathy. In taking Kathy's place, Greg disarmed the veteran and resolved the crisis without any physical harm to anyone. The whole process took 13 minutes. I should mention that the vast majority of our police officers are veterans themselves, and they all are specifically trained to de-escalate volatile situations. It would have been very easy for Kathy and Greg to wait for the SWAT team and the hostage negotiators that were already on their way, but they didn't. They acted based on their commitment to care for veterans, their desire to do the right thing, and their considerable training. And in doing so, I believe they saved lives. A quick postscript. After the crisis, the team got together and insisted that this veteran not be sent somewhere else for his inpatient mental health care. They want to take care of him there. These are the kind of people that are being vilified day in and day out in broad brushstrokes about VA employees. So for employees like Kathy and Greg, as well as for our veterans, we'll continue to approach discipline squarely with a single objective in mind, to do what's right and in the process restore veterans' confidence in VA. We won't hesitate to take corrective action when warranted and available evidence supports it, but we won't administer punishment based on IG opinions, referrals to the Department of Justice, recycled and embellished media accounts, or external pressure. It's simply not right, and it's not in the best interest of the veterans we serve. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I think your statement is pretty damn inconsistent. Not a single member of this committee would ever say something about disciplining people like Kathy or Greg. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention, but to imply that we have is disingenuous, and you know that. My statement this morning is based on the written statement that was prepared that is vastly different than what Mr. Gibson just laid out. So I hope you will all avail yourself to the written statement that was submitted for the record and is out for everybody to read on the table outside. I want to start by saying that I believe many of the elements in your written statement reflect a passive criticism of our efforts and calls for changes made by this committee, this Congress, and in fact many of the veteran service organizations that you so highly praise, and we appreciate the work that they do every day. We're all educated enough to know what the definition of accountability is. You and the Secretary have now decided to change that definition. You say that we have changed it, but in fact, we need to be educated on what that word means, and that is in your written statement. Holding somebody accountable is for their actions that they are liable for and should have to transparently answer for, and it's not simply about being transparent about your goals and how to achieve them, as you stated in your testimony. Accordingly, to Merriam-Webster's accountability, it means an obligation or a willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. Quite honestly, I think the tone of your written statement proves why we are so disappointed with the lack of accountability at the Department of Veterans Affairs, because it illustrates that the department and its senior officials still refuse to take responsibility for the corrosive culture that is in the agency. In fact, if you look at the Google definition of accountability, used in a sentence, it says, quote, "Their lack of accountability has corroded public respect," end quote. If you substituted the words of Department for Veterans Affairs for the word "there," it would be 100% correct today. The Department of Veterans Affairs' lack of accountability has corroded public respect. As evidenced by VA senior leaders' unwillingness to aggressively root out that corrosion, you continue to blame this Congress, the media, for undue pressure for VA's problems in applying appropriate disciplinary measures. You even blame your own IG for, and I quote from your statement, quote, "unfounded rhetoric that creates an unfounded expectation which does a distinct disservice to taxpayers and to veterans," end quote. Obviously, To this day, there appears to be no real acceptance of responsibility for VA's continued and pervasive failure to seriously discipline its employees, and it seems as if there's no effort to change it. Words matter. Neither I nor anybody on this committee has ever said that accountability is only achieved through firing people. You've alluded to that in both your written statement and your verbal statement. But we have instead always believed that the disciplinary actions taken against employees should be commensurate with the actions that warranted them, and that's something that is consistently lacking at the department. You stated in your written testimony that we need to, quote, permit you to carry out the executive branch responsibility of proposing and deciding employee discipline independently, end quote. So let's take a look at your track record of independently proposing and deciding employee discipline. In Alexandria, Louisiana, the VA nursing assistant is charged with manslaughter in the death of a 70-year-old VA patient. VA officials originally deemed the death accidental, but a local coroner's effort helped bring about legal charges. According to VA, the employee in question has been on paid leave since December of 2013 and continues to be on paid leave to this day. At the heart of VA's delays in care scandal in Phoenix, no employees have been successfully disciplined for wait time manipulation. Even in the case of Sharon Hellman, the former director of the Phoenix VA Medical Center, the VA found a way to botch her removal after the Merit Systems Protection Board determined that VA did not even attempt to, and I quote, connect the dots of fault, end quote, to Ms. Hellman regarding the wait time issues. If VA had not lucked out and stumbled across Ms. Hellman's unethical behavior of accepting inappropriate gifts, she would still be, more likely, working at the department, firmly entrenched in the bureaucracy and on the payroll of the American taxpayer. Further, two senior managers who were also central figures there have been on paid leave since May of 2014. In Denver, the construction of a VA hospital more than $1 billion over budget. To this committee's knowledge, VA has not disciplined a single employee in conjunction with this monumental failure. Instead, you rewarded those that were charged with overseeing the project with tens of thousands of dollars in performance bonuses. VA has completed an investigation into this matter, but it is withholding the results from this committee despite our repeated attempts to get the information. And at the Martinburg, West Virginia VA Medical Center, the department refused to discipline appropriately an employee who was convicted of dealing heroin off campus. These examples of VA's lack of accountability demonstrate the importance of hearings just like this one. As Ms. Brown says, let me be clear. The constitutional role of Congress in this committee is to conduct oversight of the executive branch and your department. We will ask the questions and hold the necessary hearings to try to keep the department in check. That's basic government 101, and I'm starting to believe that some of the senior leaders at VA missed that day in school. If we as members of this committee just sit idly by and don't hold hearings until it's convenient for the department, or don't request information that we need when we need it, or don't investigate your facilities, then we would not be fulfilling our constitutional role. And surely that's not what you're asking us to do. I believe that the Secretary and yourself both came into the roles that you currently occupy with the will to make real change, and that you want to be committed to providing high-quality care and services to our veterans. And I have always said that I believe the majority of people that work at the Department of Veterans Affairs share the same commitment. But the pervasive lack of real accountability hinders these efforts and is, quite frankly, a slap in the face to each of these employees' face. This has got to change. It gets tiresome to constantly be told by you and other VA leaders that things are changing for the better and that you are committed to sustainable accountability. But then to witness otherwise. The department publicly continues to tout inflated numbers of those it's held accountable but then those numbers don't square with the truth. It's even more disappointing to receive pushback from the administration when this committee and Congress as a whole tries to move legislation to cut through the bureaucratic red tape and instill true accountability. In short, the defense of the status quo is unacceptable. Just last week, VA once again showed its inability to hold bureaucrats accountable when it announced a decision to rescind the demotions of Kimberly Graves and Diana Rubens, two individuals who have been the center of this committee's attention for several months. They spurred the outrage of several veteran organizations and the general public following the IG report that found that they used their positions of authority to move into positions with lower responsibilities while maintaining their high pay, which allegedly enabled them to financially benefit from more than $400,000 in taxpayer moving expenses. According to VA, one of the 5 binders containing evidence supporting their demotions was not given to either individual when they received their proposed notice of demotion, thereby not giving them a fair opportunity to respond to the information that was documented in this particular binder. I find it ironic, Mr. Secretary, that you personally sent me 2 letters admonishing me for potentially damaging the cases against Ms. Graves and Ms. Rubens if I proceeded with our hearings in October, yet in the end, their cases were damaged due to the inability of the VA's lawyers to simply keep track of critical evidence. I was already sorely disappointed with your decision, but I'm dumbfounded that with such a high-profile case, which included a criminal referral to the Department of Justice, that VA still found a way to botch its decision to merely demote them. Frankly, this ineptness clearly illustrates that VA can't even slap a wrist without missing the wrist. And it underscores the department's overall lack of focus on properly disciplining employees. What's even more infuriating about the whole situation is that under the Choice Act authority, VA wasn't required to provide the notice period to an employee that the department set this process up on its own. Yet sadly, lawyers, the 700 lawyers' inability to properly execute their own self-created policies has left the American public disappointed. Now we must wait as you attempt to move through the disciplinary process for a second time. And I wish I could say that it doesn't worry me how this whole spectacle will affect Rubens and Graves' impending appeals to the MSPB, but that's not the case. I just hope that VA's lawyers find a way not to lose another binder in the process. VA's decision to not even attempt to recoup the money inappropriately spent on moving Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves is astonishing to me. This money that your IG had recommended that you attempt to recoup, and money I believe they took from the American taxpayers inappropriately, it's simple. The relocation benefits were the fruit of Ms. Rubens and Graves' inappropriate behavior as determined by you, Mr. Secretary. VA's decisions not to recoup these funds is akin to letting a bank robber off the hook with a mere slap on the wrist while allowing them to keep the money. It's concerning as well that your testimony today seems to completely disregard the conclusions made by the IG and instead states that Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves merely exercised, and I quote, less than sound judgment, end quote. I would argue that 2 high-level senior managers forcing their subordinates to move to other locations so they could then obtain these positions for themselves and causing the American taxpayers to foot the bill for their exorbitantly priced moves illustrates a little more than, quote, less than sound judgment, end quote. I know many of the veterans we represent would agree. In addition to discussing last Thursday's announcement regarding Ms. Graves and Ms. Rubens, this hearing is an opportunity for the committee to end this year with a review of VA's legal ability and self-willingness to hold its employees accountable. It will also allow for us to discuss a variety of outstanding requests made by members of this committee. I sent a letter to the Secretary in October seeking information regarding a variety of instances reflecting VA's inability or unwillingness to instill real accountability. I provided a copy of the letter in each of your packets for you to review. The outline in the letter looks at several circumstances, including the following: instances of whistleblower retaliations at an assortment of locations, unconscionable settlement agreements with several VA employees resulting in huge payouts by the department, investigations into the behavior of several senior VA central office executives, the Denver Hospital construction project, and the remaining concerns with Phoenix. To date, the Secretary has not responded to my letter. As I said earlier, it's disheartening that Secretary McDonald continues to tout numbers of accountability that quite simply aren't true. In February, during an interview with Meet the Press, he claimed that 60 employees were fired for manipulating wait time, yet according to the Washington Post, that was completely false. Earlier this year, at a National Press Club event, he announced 300 people had been proposed for some type of disciplinary action for scheduling manipulation, but at the time it was only 27. Additionally, VA's own staff has told committee staff that several individuals identified as involved in patient wait time manipulation on adverse action lists that VA provides to this committee each week actually had nothing to do with wait time manipulation whatsoever. As the old saying goes, you can't fix what you don't measure. And if VA can't even get its own data right about patient wait time manipulation, how will true accountability ever be achieved? Congress can provide VA tool after tool and hold hearing after hearing, but without the will of the VA senior leadership to make real changes across the department, the corrupt culture will continue. Veterans and their families, and the majority of VA's employees who work hard every single day, deserve to be able to trust our VA, but that trust obviously needs to be earned. With that, I yield to Ms. Brown for her opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee, and to you, Mr. Secretary, and to the veterans that's watching this procedures. Let me just say before I begin that I am a little uncomfortable with the decorum of this committee and of the House at some time. In fact, I mentioned it to the clerk, and I wanted to know, when I came here, I've been on this committee for 23 years, and for the use of profanity was just not something that was done in the Congress. This Congress, and this committee in particular that I've been on for 23 years, have been very bipartisan. And I don't know what has happened to this Congress and what has happened to the members. But let me just say that we are all here to serve the veterans. And the VA served over 50 million outpatients every year. And we need to keep that in perspective as we do our due diligence. And we have attorneys on this committees and doctors, and I'm sure you all will have all of the right questions that you want to ask. But I'm concerned, and you mentioned something, because I'm concerned when you mentioned that story in the end about security. I want to know how that veteran got on that facility with a gun and with bullets that could have caused a disaster there. And I'm concerned why that veteran is in outpatient and not inpatient facility. So I hope at the end of your testimony that you can answer that question for me, because I am concerned about the security at the facilities. As we drill down on these issues, I am most concerned about the veterans getting the care that they need. And also, you mentioned in your report, and I asked the question about the year's end, we're supposed to be drilling down on homeless veterans. You mentioned it in your report. I want to know where we are. I want the members to know there are so many cities that have signed up. I want us to know whether our cities have signed up to participate, our mayor and our communities, to help with the homelessness as far as the veterans is concerned. We've also talked about having a healthcare day at the different facilities where we as members can go in and bring in all of the people that have not had an appointment so they can get those appointments. I want to know about the health care for veterans. Yes, I do know that we need to talk about accountability and that we need to make sure that the perception and this Congress and we contribute to the perception that it's widespread problems in the VA. We need to assure the veteran that that is not the case. I do know when I visit my facilities, whether it's in Orlando or Jacksonville or Gainesville, once they get into the VA, they are happy with the services. And I want everybody in this country to have that kind of experience. And so I'm going to just yield my time to you to answer those questions about the security at the VA facility. I'm interested in knowing how somebody got in there with a gun and bullets. Do we not have the security there to protect our employees? Can you answer that question for me?
Ms. Brown, we will allow the Secretary to answer it in the normal questions. We can't allow him to answer that question during your opening statement time.
Oh, I yield back.
Okay, the time has been yielded back. I'll begin the questioning at this point with the Secretary. Who discovered the fifth binder of evidence was not provided to Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves?
Certainly, I'd be happy to explain what happened.
No, I just want to know who discovered the binder was missing.
The legal team, so it's a group of 4 people.
So you're saying VA discovered it?
We discovered it upon receiving the electronic copy of the 2 employees' appeals, yes.
So in other words, the employees that were appealing, their attorneys found it.
No, they filed their appeals as they are required to, and they included in their appeals all of the evidence they had received. Upon reviewing those, we realized that some of the materials were not included.
Sloan, do you agree with that?
I am relying on Meghan for the details of what happened there.
Okay, because that's not what this committee has been told. But I will take your testimony. And can you tell me what do you think the legal ramifications will be with having to rescind and begin the process again?
Certainly, sir. The point of rescinding and reissuing is to cure what would otherwise be a due process violation. So the rescission and provision of the additional evidence should cure the problem entirely.
Sloan, in your written statement, you said that Ms. Rubens and Ms. Graves' cases were, and I quote, there were gaps between the rhetoric in the OIG report and the underlying evidence, and I end quote. Explain to us how that gap, how do you see it so differently from the way the Inspector General sees it?
I cannot explain the Inspector General's position. I would simply say that, and Meghan will recall the occasion, as I sat down over a weekend and reviewed all the evidence in the matter, I came back in the next morning on Monday morning, and my question was, I don't understand how they've reached the conclusion that they've reached based upon this particular evidence. What am I missing here?
Then how could they made a referral to the Department of Justice? Did the Inspector General's office just mess it up that bad?
It is incomprehensible to me that they made that referral. I find no basis, and our attorneys have found no basis for that referral.
And I don't want to dwell on that, but you've also said that you don't have the ability to recoup. Whether it's Ms. Graves or Ms. Rubens or anybody else, you have no way to go in and recoup any of their. Can you cite the statutory reason that you can't go back and get that information?
I'm going to lean on Meghan here again.
Absolutely. The process for recouping any improper payment that's made by the government is through the Improper Payments Elimination and Recovery Act of 2010. It's Public Law 111-204, Section 2F. When it comes to employees, a debt may be owed and collected if the employee receives an improper payment. An improper payment is any payment that should not have been made or was made in an incorrect amount. The legal determination of our team is that with respect to certain payments that were made to Ms. Rubens in the context of her move, her temporary quarters subsistence expenses, there were some improper payments for alcoholic beverages and for...
I apologize. I appreciate that. The committee is well aware. So it is your testimony that the other payments that were made to Ms. Graves and Ms. Rubens were appropriate payments.
They were duly authorized under the law, yes.
They were appropriate payments.
They were approved by the senior leadership based on their belief that these individuals should make those moves, yes.
Can you give us an update about Ms. Filipov and Mr. Hodge, who have been on paid leave since June? I'm hearing a rumor, and you can dispel that rumor if you choose to do so today, that there has been a delay in a final decision because there were procedural mistakes there as well. Is that true or not?
Those actions are being taken by the Veterans Benefits Administration, not by my office. I don't have specific information with respect to their status.
I'm not aware of the status on those two either, but we will provide you an update.
Okay. When? This
Today
afternoon?
is Wednesday, before the end of the week.
Yeah, okay. According to the media reports, AFGE officials at VA Central Office completed and delivered a report to the Secretary alleging misconduct at a number of VA executives. Has any action been taken in regards to the report, and can the department provide us an unredacted copy of the report?
Every one of the allegations raised in the AFGE correspondence have been investigated. There is a report that's been delivered. I think it's dated the 3rd of December. And based upon the earlier request, we're prepared to provide unredacted versions of both the AFGE letter as well as the report.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Would you please answer the question, how many veterans do you all serve per year? We had major discussions about the wait time. What's the status of the wait times? And also, what is the approval rating of the veterans once they get into the system? And then we'll go on to this incident that you mentioned.
Yes, ma'am. We're seeing 6.5 to 7 million unique patients, individual patients, over the course of a year. Inside VA in 2015, I'm going from memory here, they completed somewhere in the neighborhood of 56 million inpatient appointments. There were roughly another 20 million, outpatient appointments.
56 million.
56 million, yes, ma'am.
Outpatient
Yes, ma'am.
appointments.
Inside VA, and another roughly 20 million that are completed in the community over the course of the year.
Okay, with our stakeholders, our partners.
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. And so the second question there was wait times.
Yes.
You may recall in earlier testimony, we talked about the effort that we undertook over the course of more than a year and still are undertaking to improve access to care. In that roughly 12-month period of time following the outbreak on the issue, we completed both inside and outside VA about 7 million more appointments, roughly a 10% increase in appointments, a very material increase in access to care. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the perspective, over that same period of time, more veterans came to us for more of their care. So what we saw is veterans waiting more than 30 days back in May or June of last year. That number has actually increased over the intervening period of time because more veterans are turning to us for care as we improve access to care.
Do you have the resources you need to serve those additional veterans?
My expectation, what we've been doing, and you asked about the health day, and I know you're aware of the stand down that we had a couple of weeks ago all across VA. The focus there was on ensuring that we are providing care that is needed urgently to veterans and that they're getting that urgent care timely. I would tell you that is more and more of a focus under Dr. David Shulkin's leadership as Undersecretary for Health. I would tell you, I do not expect the wait times to come down. I think as we improve the quality of health care, as we improve access to care, as we improve the veteran experience, we're going to find more veterans coming to us for more care. And as long as there are economic incentives for veterans where they can come to VA for care at a lower out-of-pocket cost, we're going to find veterans coming to us for care.
Now, would you go and talk about that security, because that gun really disturbed me, and I want to know how someone could get in the facility. Do we not have at the entrance point the kind of security that we have here in Congress?
Absolutely not, ma'am. Not in any way, shape, or form. We have enhanced security at 2 or 3 locations. They're in large metropolitan areas principally. If you look at the majority of VA facilities, they were built decades in the facility. The VA Medical Center in Denver is 50 years old, 60 years old, something like that. There are multiple points of ingress and egress. The ability to secure every one of those, the ability to search and run every single veteran that comes in for care through those facilities would it be an insurmountable obstacle to us being able to deliver the care that we need and the experience that veterans expect. So no, we do not have that. And you'll recall several months ago, we actually had a physician assassinated in our El Paso Medical Center. We continue to work to refine and strengthen our security posture to ensure that we're protecting not only employees but other veterans. But our ability to put in place a moat, if you will, a security moat around the VA is really limited by our need to provide the care for veterans that we need to provide.
Well, I'm just wanting to know, I mean, we have hardened the, as far as courthouses and here, this facility. I would like to know what is it that we need to do to protect the veterans at the facilities. I think this is major, given where we are.
Yes, ma'am. Well, and we as we build new facilities, we build hardened facilities as well, which unfortunately adds to the cost of those facilities. We also build in more limited means of access, ingress and egress, so that it's easier to secure the premise. But when we're operating with facilities that are on average 50 years old, it is very difficult for us to provide that kind of absolute security.
Thank you. I think this is the major issue that we need to, as the Congress, need to address. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. You mentioned the 50-year-old Denver facility not being constructed for safety reasons with multiple ingress and egresses. The new hospital is constructed to where you don't have an ingress-egress problem?
I think it's less severe than the issue in the old Denver hospital, but it will still be an issue.
Okay. Mr. Bilirakis.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Secretary Gibson.
Yes, sir.
Back home, I'm still hearing employees that they fear retaliation. How do you ensure moving forward that these employers are not getting retaliated for wanting to do the right thing?
That's a great question.
With regard to whistleblowers.
No, understand. We've come, I believe, a long way over the previous year in terms of dealing with the issue around whistleblowers and whistleblower retaliation. I mentioned earlier that the extent of the travels that Bob and I have made to VA facilities. We speak to employees at every single one of those facilities. We meet with whistleblowers at those facilities. In fact, I'll be in Atlanta Friday, meeting with one of the principal whistleblowers down there, as well as our staff. We make it clear consistently that retaliation against a whistleblower will not be tolerated, and in fact, we model behavior that says, in fact, what we're looking for are employees that will raise their hands and help us find ways to deliver better care for veterans. The administration of discipline as part of leadership is something that happens all over the organization. And so as we change the culture of the organization, we will reset that kind of benchmark for what represents appropriate disciplinary action as it relates to any misconduct whatsoever,
Let
including
me
whistleblower
follow up
retaliation.
on this subject.
Sure.
In September of this year, the Office of Special Counsel sent President Obama a letter which highlighted the several high-profile whistleblower cases. You're familiar with that letter, is that correct?
I am familiar with it, yes, sir.
What action has VA taken in response to this particular letter, and what additional legislative authority do you need to better protect whistleblowers and discipline those who retaliate against them?
In fact, I met with Carolyn Lerner, the special counsel. We discussed the letter at length and the specific issues in detail. There are a couple of instances where their findings and our findings have not matched up, and we've asked that our respective teams reconcile those. There are other instances where we have, as you may know, implemented expedited processes where a whistleblower who has been retaliated against is made whole for that retaliation. We do that in concert, working very closely with the Office of Special Counsel. As we undertake to pursue the manager, the responsible manager for the retaliation, we are back to the evidentiary standards that we're required to adhere to in order to be able to enforce that accountability. And I would tell you that the evidentiary standards for the action that we take to restore a whistleblower and the evidentiary standard that we take to impose discipline are two different standards. And that's part of the conversation that we've had with the Office of Special Counsel as it relates to those
I'd like
specific
for you
cases.
to follow up, Sloan, on this issue with
Yes, sir.
regard to the letter.
Okay, sir.
And any recommendations you have and any possible legislation that we can actually present to
Yes, sir.
and get passed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what type of message do you believe you're sending? I know we've been over this, but it's so very important. What type of message do you believe you're sending to the VBA employees when they read that the VA OIG's recommendations, then they read the recommendations, then see the relatively light proposed punishment for Mrs. Rubens and Mrs. Graves? Again, how will their subordinates ever take them seriously? Please answer that question directly.
Well, as I mentioned in my oral testimony, which obviously rubbed folks the wrong way, I believe what oftentimes happens today is there's an allegation made, whether substantiated or not, and what happens is investigations get launched and media gets contacted and there are stories, and at that point, the individual becomes guilty until proven innocent. And I hope the employees of VBA, the message that they will get is that their leadership is committed to doing the right thing, that we are committed to holding senior leaders accountable for their behavior, but that we are also committed to doing what is supported by the evidence.
Well, in your opinion, have Mrs. Rubens and Ms. Graves, you think they've lost credibility within the VA?
I don't, that's unavoidable. How do you go through all of the public airing of the IG report and the reactions to the IG report and not lose face, not lose standing? It's impossible. It would be foolish to represent that. But I'm not going to propose a disciplinary action that's based upon a media coverage or an opinion that is expressed in an IG report if it is not supported by the evidence. That's just doing the right thing. It's that simple. And I honestly, I meant what I said. When I went through this particular case, I knew that proposed decision was not going to sit well with virtually everybody. And I own that. That's on me. But at least I can look at the mirror and be convinced that I made the right decision. I look forward, once this case is concluded and the appeal process has run its course, I look forward to meeting with any member of this committee to discuss in detail the substantiation of my decision and providing to any member of this committee the full body of evidence, unredacted, so that they can form their own opinion as to whether or not I made a decision that was that
So
I own that. That's
our
part of the
veterans.
accountability you
Bottom
see coming
line is
here.
I'm concerned about our veterans.
Yes, sir.
What type of service they receive.
And I'm concerned about that too.
Well, thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any evidence that we don't have?
Sir, I don't know what evidence you have.
We got it from your office, so
I believe,
think
I'm
you
told
should
that what evidence you got from the IG. I do not, I have no idea what the IG gave you.
So we have all the transcripts. And so will you give us the evidence at the end of the process?
Absolutely, positively, yes. Every single piece of
How
evidence.
would you have
that we
evidence the IG wouldn't have?
I'm sorry?
How would you have evidence that the IG would not have?
I don't think that we have evidence that the IG doesn't
Okay,
have.
that's all.
I just don't know what they gave you.
That's fine.
We're sort of back to the
assure
question
IG
of making
is
sure
much-
that we got all the evidence. Cat, we will give you everything.
I'm sure the IG
every
is
day.
much more transparent with us than you have been. Ms. Custer. Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. Mr.
Yes, ma'am.
You said in your very opening statement that, accountability isn't just about firing anyone. Several months ago, I made a similar comment in a hearing saying that all we talk about is firing people. Some of our problem at the VA is hiring the right people in the first place. And I think we ought to put some more emphasis on that.
ma'am.
And indeed, I've been pleased to work with Dr. Winstrup and Dr. Benachek to look at the hiring process. And thank you for your good work on that. Do you have any, just shifting gears a little, do you have any suggestions of what we can do to help at that end of the process as well as the problems that you're having at the firing end of the process?
On the hiring end, among the legislative priorities that we've set forth is a provision requesting that we deem medical center directors and vision directors Title 38 employees, as opposed to Title V employees, which will provide us substantial additional flexibility to be able to attract the kind of talent that we want to attract and need to attract to fill those critical positions. Yes, ma'am.
We had a roundtable the other day with some VA folks and
Yes,
then
ma'am.
some representatives and the Nurses Association, and they were making just some bureaucratic suggestions of cleaning up the process, making it work, making the application simpler, quicker, more available. Are y'all looking internally at some of those issues that you can do that we don't have to do or might not be appropriate to do through legislation?
Absolutely, positively, yes. We have identified underneath the MyVA structure 12 absolutely critical priorities that will be a focus over the coming 13 months. And one of those has to do with hiring practices, filling these key positions and streamlining the hiring practices. Particularly in VHA, we have an organization that does not operate like an integrated enterprise. We've talked about this before in here. And so you'll find variances in hiring practices all over the organization.
We heard that, right?
People that aren't taking advantage of the authorities that are available to them, people that are going through extra steps that are not necessary to go through. We have got to identify the streamlined best practice that gives us all the authority that we possibly can exercise, and then standardize that approach to hiring all across the department.
Well, would you keep us apprised of
Yes,
that
ma'am.
as it goes, and the staff for the three of us as we
Yes,
work
ma'am.
on a kind of a bipartisan bill? Because we don't want to wait a year and then get a report and then
No.
have to start all over. It'd
No,
be
and-
nice
and-
if we could kind of work this together as we go.
We would love to do that.
Right.
Will
Thank
the
you very much.
gentle lady yield to me
Yes.
for a question?
Yes, I'll yield.
In our roundtable discussion, one of the things that is a major problem is how long it takes for the VA to hire someone. And as we develop expediting the process, I hope we include in there, because basically by the time VA hires someone, some other agency have taken that person.
You're absolutely right, ma'am, and that is a critical component of what we have to do. You're absolutely right.
You're taking my time back. Yes, that was one of the things that we mentioned about speeding up the process.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
making it simpler. So,
Yes, ma'am.
appreciate working with you on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Dr. Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. And you are correct. I did take a little offense to some of what you said.
Yes, sir.
And I can assure you that if some of these people had been working in your shop when you were in the private sector or in my shop when I was in the private sector, they would have been fired. And you can't have 320,000 employees and everybody is doing a great job. That's just too big of an organization, and I understand that, and you understand that.
Yes, sir.
I think probably you'll find most of us physicians on the panel up here are more interested in the access and the quality of care that veterans are getting. Let me just read you a text I got here 9 minutes before this hearing started. Phil, sorry to bother you, but we're doing, this is a general surgeon in Johnson City, Tennessee. We're doing VA critical care, critically ill patients that spill over when they're full. Unfortunately, we're having trouble getting paid. Is there anything your staff can do to help us? This goes on. I get one of these once a week. And so everything is not good right now with the VA. There are a lot of issues and problems, and I think that's the problem. And the other thing that I think the VA could do tomorrow to help access and quality, I spent 4 hours at the VA 2 weeks ago before Thanksgiving. Went down and walked through the electronic health record, looked at that, and talked to one of my friends who's an orthopedic surgeon, formerly in private practice, now at the VA. I looked at how long it took him to see one patient, what he had to go through. So it's impossible to pick up with the current system that you have, their productivity. So as long as that system stays in place, my friend cannot see any more patients. You just can't do it. It took him 30 minutes to inject a rotator cuff. It would have taken him 10 in his office, but it took 30. And with the electronic health record and all the documentation and all the stuff he had to do to put in the record, he just can't do it. So you're going to have these waits, and then when you do that, we're going to be on you, and you're going to have people, so that the data doesn't look bad, manipulate those times. That's exactly what's happened, and that's why we're sitting here and been having this conversation. So one of the things I would recommend you do is take people like myself and just make me a certified VA provider that sees patients on the outside, and then pay them so I don't get these texts where in a timely fashion, like Medicare does, they're very good at it. They don't pay you very much, but at least they get the money to you, and you can count on that. And I think when a physician, and this, I happen to know this physician very well, he operated on my wife. He's a very fine physician, and the VA won't pay him. So why would you expect him to continue to bail the VA out, and you're going to just back downstream, do exactly what you're talking about? Veterans can't get in. So anyway, I've said enough about that. You could certify me as a private practitioner, as a certified VA provider, and we'll provide that care if you just pay us. That's not a difficult thing to do, and knock off your long waits right now if you just let the private sector help you out. And you wouldn't have these hiring things, and Ms. Brown is absolutely right. It takes forever, and many of the good people get hired away by somebody else by the time the VA's made a decision to actually have them work. So the way you can fix that, if you can't fix the hiring process, just take providers like myself, put a little thing at the bottom of my shingle that says Dr. Rowe, certified VA provider. I'll see the patients, get the information right back over there in a timely fashion, take care of them, if the veteran wants to do that. And many veterans do. Many veterans would like to have their care in the community. So those are some suggestions I would make. I don't think everything is fine at Lake Wobegon, personally.
It's not.
You got lots of problems, and
Yeah.
so to come up and accuse the Congress of, we didn't create the problem. We're trying to find out what they are and resolve the problems because it is affecting veterans. I think that's our motivation. So I'll finish with that. If you have any comments, I'll be glad to hear them.
Well, as I said, I think we're all after the same thing: better health care and benefit outcomes for veterans. Payment promptness has been a problem at VA for years. We have made great strides over the last probably 9 to 12 months, but we still have a long way to go. And many of the changes that we're making there is moving us toward much more what the private sector practice looks like. I thought we talked about this 3 weeks ago at the last hearing, as we were talking about payment processing. 60% of our payments are still processed in paper, and we're encouraging our providers to do that electronically so that we can accelerate that timeline.
What do I tell my friend after I've had this hearing today? When's he going to get paid?
Please ask him, if you will email me his information, I will see that we're working on it today.
Okay, good. I will do that. Thank
Please.
you. I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield for me for a second? Was this physician approved before he saw the patient?
Oh, I think so. This particular physician I know has worked with the VA for years, like
Yeah,
Dr. Benechek did.
I'm sure he would have been. To be doing surgery, yes, absolutely, positively, yes.
Taking care of critically ill people.
Well, it should be no reason for slow pay.
That's exactly right. You're right.
Ms. Price, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gibson, your testimony included reference to training that the VA's Office of General Counsel and Office of Accountability Review received from the Office of Special Counsel regarding their ability to investigate whistleblower retaliation and also to hold those who retaliate against whistleblowers accountable. So just two questions regarding that. I know that you went into this a little bit with Mr. Bilirakis's questions. Some anecdotal evidence as to how this training has improved those two offices' operation, number one. And number two, how do you implement these trainings at the level where it really matters, which is at the local level at an individual VA medical center or regional office? If
I may, I'd like to ask Meghan to respond because she was directly involved in that.
Thank you very much for the question. The goal was train the trainer training. We do have lawyers and human resources specialists all over the country who can be our arms and legs and mouths. So some folks from the Office of Accountability Review and some attorneys from the Office of General Counsel here in DC sat down with the Office of Special Counsel's head trainer, got ourselves trained, produced the curriculum that is then being cascaded out to all supervisors is the goal. By the people who are on the ground with the supervisors in terms of HR specialists and lawyers in the field.
And that's how it gets down to the local level.
That's right.
So do you have a year-end compilation of the instances of the number of whistleblowers and any potential retaliation? And if there was retaliation, what was done vis-a-vis both the whistleblower and the person who retaliated against them? Could you compile that information?
We don't collect it on a rolled-up basis, but certainly can put out a data call to provide that information to you, yes.
I think that that would go a long way in terms of changing the culture of whistleblowers wanting to come forward because they know that they're not going to be retaliated against, and if they are, there will be immediate accountability and punishment. And I think you can only do that by being able to, I mean, you can't assume that someone in a VA in Texas knows about what happened to a retaliator in New York.
Absolutely. Yes,
So
I agree.
I would make that suggestion. Mr. Gibson, I have asked, I don't recall if I've spoken directly to you about this, but I've asked for the Administrative Investigation Board report on the Denver construction project multiple times, and that request has been repeatedly denied. Now, I understand that there is a review that's taking place, an evaluation as to whether or not there needs to be any administrative action taken against current personnel. But I don't understand, and maybe it's a legal impediment, but I don't understand why we, this committee, can't see that, because when more money is needed for that project, you come here, and we, with a gun to our head, have to say yes. When we've, and this has been a big issue for me, that no one has been held accountable for the cost overruns on that project. And so I want to know if there's any way that this committee can see that report, and I don't see how that could possibly hinder what, if any, administrative action would be necessary to take against current personnel, if any.
The position that I had taken previously as it relates to disciplinary actions in Denver was that we would look at any employees that continue to be at VA and any appropriate discipline following the completion of the IG's report. The IG is still doing their investigation. Based upon the different approach that I've outlined in my testimony, I've instructed that we not wait any longer, that we go ahead and conclude any appropriate disciplinary actions as it relates to individuals that are still employed at VA. I've directed that proposing and deciding officials be appointed, that we complete that timely. And as soon as we've done that process, I look forward to providing the unredacted AIB report to the committee so that we've gotten through just the decision process on non-SES employees because the appeal process can take a very long, extended period of time. We feel like doing it immediately following the disciplinary decision is the appropriate time. And I would tell you, my expectation in the future is that we're able to provide that kind of information much more timely, because we're not going to wait months and months and months for an IG investigation to conclude.
Well, I guess we can look into why the IG's report is taking as long as it is, but, you know, when you come to this committee and ask for people to
Yes, ma'am.
release, you know, $1 billion for a project that we have
ma'am.
absolutely no empirical data about why these cost overruns, why we're facing that, I think it might behoove the agency to make as much relevant information available to us.
Yeah, as we mentioned on a hearing some time back on this particular subject, I continue to believe, having read all the evidence, I continue to believe that the most authoritative, comprehensive account of what went wrong is the decision that was rendered by the Court of the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, CBCA, which decision was rendered last December and which is readily available. I'd be glad to get a copy of that. That is the most comprehensive accounting of what happened and what went wrong that I have seen yet.
Does it conflict at all with the report, with the Administrative Investigation Board's report?
I would tell you the Administrative Investigation Board is more granular and gets down to the individual by name parties. And the CBCA finding does not.
Okay, thank you. I yield back. Thank
Yes,
you,
ma'am.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Huelskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Undersecretary, first, did I hear you correctly earlier that you stated wait times would not improve?
I don't expect wait times to go down, no. I think as we improve access to care, as we improve care quality, as we improve the veterans' experience at VA, I think we are going to find that demand will outstrip our ability to supply that care. That's my expectation.
Do they need to improve?
Do what need to?
Wait
improve?
times.
I would love to see wait times improve, but it's a false promise for me to sit here. I'm looking at what happened over the previous year. We increased inpatient and outpatient appointments inside and outside VA by, not inpatient, outpatient appointments inside and outside VA by roughly 10% in a year. That's huge. And yet
And we had massive budget increases too.
and yet what we saw were more veterans coming to us for care, longer wait times. We've got to ensure that we are providing urgent care to those veterans that need care urgently. And
By your own definition, you have over 512,000 veterans waiting more than 30 days for an appointment.
yes,
And you're not going to improve that at all? You got 142,000 waiting more than 60 days by your own definition, and you can't improve that at all?
I would tell you that the dual focus, Dr. Shulkin has focused his organization very intensively on providing urgent care. The other area that I have pushed hard on and continue to push hard on are what I refer to as veterans waiting the longest for care. And so it starts at the longest wait times and works down, so that we're using the resources that we have to provide urgent care and to accelerate the access to care for those veterans waiting the longest. But for me to sit here and say that the 30-day wait list is going to go away, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, I'm sure the committee's received some information on this, but the definition, and I want you to clarify, the preferred date, it's not the date they come in and ask for the appointment. You start the clock based on the date for the appointment deemed clinically appropriate. Is that correct?
Either the date, if it's provided that the date is deemed clinically appropriate, or the date that the veteran wants to be seen. The large majority of our appointments are return to clinic appointments.
I understand
So-
that, and there shouldn't be a 60-day wait for those. But
There should not.
who determines what's clinically appropriate? Who's the,
That's a discussion between the clinician and the patient.
and where does, in the scheduler doesn't play a role in that at all? So a request comes in, the scheduler talks to the physician, for example, and says, what do you think when we should schedule that? That doesn't go to the physician.
clinician provides that clinically appropriate date in the
The scheduler or the provider?
the provider, the clinician, the doctor, or the nurse provides that date to the scheduler. So it's in the system.
So every call that comes in, the provider, whether a physician or a nurse, actually makes the decision on scheduling?
If a veteran's calling in for an appointment, then they're asking to be seen. And in that
But that's not when the clock starts, correct?
if the veteran says, I want to be seen today, it's exactly when the clock starts. And if the veteran is conveying a need, for example, I have severe chest pains, come in right now.
Or wait
So there's
60 days?
that kind of
Yeah.
fundamental triaging that's happening.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to understand that, and I don't think it really gets to the point, because you're claiming a waiting date of only 4 days for mental health services. Is that actually the claim that you have today? You only 4 days wait for mental
If you
health?
look at the average wait time for a completed mental health appointment, yes, that is correct.
No, not completed, waiting. What's the perspective? How long will they expect to wait?
I think the pending date is, it's a few days longer than that on average, but I would tell you what that doesn't capture is the 23% of appointments that are completed on a same-day basis. 20% if you exclude the emergency department.
No, I understand that. So anyway, I'm explore this further. One last question about the VA wait time schedule problems in Phoenix. You placed two, Mr. Curry and Mr. Robinson, on administrative leave and been there since May of 2014. What's the status of any disciplinary actions against these two individuals?
We are wrapping up those two cases right now. Both of those two individuals were placed on administrative leave at the request of the IG, along with Sharon Helmer.
IG doesn't make that decision. You make the decision. You placed them on administrative leave. Can you
We made
explain
the
how
de-
somebody can be on administrative leave for a year and a half and they're still getting paid?
We made the decision. We put them on administrative leave at the IG's request. We have
You told us here, Mr. Secretary.
We have within the last several
IG
weeks received
makes
the
recommendations,
evidence
and you
from the
don't-
IG, and
Mr.
having
Chairman?
received the evidence from the IG, we're going to pursue disciplinary
Mr.
action.
Secretary,
Yes, sir.
those are recommendations from the IG, is that correct?
The
You
recommendation
spent
from
your
the IG.
testimony attacking the IG. You placed him on leave for a year and a half, paid by taxpayers the whole time. When will we get disciplinary actions against those two people that went after three brave whistleblowers that you've settled with in Phoenix? When will we get an answer? When will they be disciplined?
Those disciplinary actions are in process now. We've received all
When
the evidence.
will they be done?
Tens of thousands of pages of evidence that have been turned over to VA by the IG within the last 30 days. And we are going through that evidence right now in order to be able to
kidding me. After
take
a year
action
and a
that can
half,
be sustained.
They're still getting paid by the taxpayers, and you can't figure out a way to discipline them. When will we know?
As
You
I
don't know?
said, as I said earlier, the practice changes now because I'm not going to wait any longer.
A year and a half, I would say you've waited long enough.
We waited too long.
They should lose their job or be disciplined,
We
but not be
waited.
sitting on
We
their,
waited
what's
too
getting
long.
paid.
We waited too long, and we're not going to do it again, because I'm not going to defer to the IG's investigation, or frankly, to a Department of Justice investigation.
So you don't know
because
when
I
it'll be
can't
done.
be assured when it's going to be completed. That's the change that we're talking about. It's unacceptable. It's not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable to veterans, and it's not acceptable to the American taxpayer.
Well, I agree. After a
and
year
the
and
other
a half,
change-
it's time to do the job
and the-
take care of the Phoenix situation. Thank
And
you,
the
Mr.
other
Chairman. I
change
yield back.
the other change that I mentioned that we have imposed is we will not routinely place employees that are subject to discipline action on administrative leave. They will be detailed to other duties unless there is an egregious example where they need to be removed from all responsibility.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I, like all of my colleagues here, are most concerned, and as you are, about our veterans and making sure that they are well served on a timely basis.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know this hearing is supposed to be about a review of accountability and the broader accountabilities within the VA. And I think really, for me and my perspective, it's much less about the disciplinary process. I know that sometimes can be frustrating to people, but we must have the due process of the people and employees that we hire and retain. So I get that frustration. I understand it. I think my personal frustration is more about sort of the broader accountabilities within the VA. that we are changing procedures, doing what we can to close loopholes and other kinds of things so that when we are hiring new employees, we are absolutely clear to them what their responsibilities are, what they are held accountable for. So in the event that we have to get to this place of disciplinary action, we have our facts really, really clear. And that's, for me, that's where the frustration lies. And I think my frustration also lies when I read your testimony. The testimony builds up about all of the progress that the VA has made. And I am not doubting that we have not made progress. And I believe in your leadership and the Secretary's leadership, and I believe that you're in a mode of continuous improvement. I'm not doubting that. But I think my frustration also lies in that you end up citing the very best data possible as it relates to wait times in your testimony. So if you look at pending wait times and so forth, the data, it paints a different picture. Now, you've just said in your testimony, the demand outweighs the supply, and I'm not sure that we're ever going to be able to get there. But for me, that's the kind of information that I want to be, completely upfront with, and not lead people down the path of, look at this exceptional data. We've got, the wait times. What did we say that? I think you said the wait times right now. I can't remember. The national wait time is 4 days. And that sounds great. It's like, oh my goodness, where we were before and where we are now on a national basis, only 4 days, that sounds like we have done extraordinary work. But yet we still know that the problems still exist. In my district, for example, the pending wait times is roughly 28 days. That doesn't sound as good. That it sounds like and I know that we're down people in the district, and that's causing those pending wait times to be longer. So I think that's my frustration, and I'm really looking to you and the VA to come back to us with ways in which we can improve upon our systems and regulations so that we can be abundantly clear of what our expectations are so that we don't run into that we can minimize anyway. It will never be perfect, but that we can minimize some of these issues that we're talking about now with, with the Denver hospital, the Diana Rubens, Kim Graves issues. I think if we did it a little differently, maybe some of that would have been alleviated. So that's what I'm posing to you is if you can come back to us and show us how we can, and if we need legislative fixes to it, let us know that so that we can move forward collectively and continue to make improvement.
Yes, ma'am. The pending appointment, there are differences in the numbers between pending appointments and completed appointments, as referred to earlier. One of the most powerful ways we can provide timely access to care is by allowing a veteran to be seen on the same day. And 20+% of our appointments are in fact accomplished and completed in that kind of a metric. So that represents a large portion of the difference between pending appointment wait times and completed appointment wait times. I am confident even in the 3 or 4 day metric, there are still veterans that are waiting too long for the care, waiting longer than they should be waiting. And so that's part of the emphasis of looking at those that are waiting the longest, those that have the most urgent need, to ensure that they are being prioritized and seen as urgently as.
But you understand the point that I'm making.
I do understand.
In terms, I think
Yes,
there
ma'am.
still are other improvements that can be made so that our expectations are clear. And then if we do get to a disciplinary situation, it should be clearer because I think it takes that work up front. I mean, I was a school board member. I've been through these processes before, and it's a matter of management doing their due diligence to make things abundantly clear, to make these processes clear.
And I would point to the changes that we made in every performance evaluation for every single medical center director is a good example of that, where instead of just tracking some random activities, we are focused on the veteran healthcare outcomes that they are most directly responsible for. And where there is poor performance, they're held accountable for performance.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I apologize, and I yield back.
That's okay. Ms. Walorski?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you know, I want to just describe what it's like in my office in Indiana. Veterans and a lot of their advocacy groups watch these hearings. They tune in, they track what the VA says, they track the questions we ask, and they'll oftentimes come in and be very excited about what the VA says. One of the issues that in my district has been really important is the choice program, which is never really rolled out correctly. And there were, you know, the VA just held a town hall meeting a couple of nights ago in our district. And again, you know, every time the town halls roll out, it's people talking about, you know, need for service. You know, they're outside the area, they're in a rural area, and the answer from our VISN comes back that the choice program, you know, really isn't rolling out yet, and it's got these issues, and the number of people that actually can apply for the program and actually receive any kind of help other than through the VA is very, very small. We have continual turnover in our VISN with people that actually run the facilities or have been expanded out all over the country. And one of the issues that happens in my district, though, and probably other districts as well, is we'll get a veteran that walks in the front door of our district office, and they'll be carrying either a box or a bag, and it is full of prescription drugs. High-powered opiates, psychotropic drugs, and they'll come in and they'll set this box down and they will say, I have all these drugs, I am in so much pain, and the VA isn't helping me. They're just giving me more drugs, and I don't know what to do. And they come into us, and so we obviously pick up the phone, we call and make a congressional inquiry out of it, and start asking questions, who's taking care of this veteran? And, you know, we look at that when we look at the suicide rate and those kind of things, but I'm curious, what is the policy, the oversight, and the standard operating procedure that the VA uses when it comes to this issue of veterans that are either in-house or coming and going from someplace in the veteran community for mental health services? What kind of due diligence is the VA doing to make sure that there's a tight control on policy and individual plans then for these veterans?
I will take my best shot at that answer being a non-clinician. I would tell you that one of the most powerful tools we have inside VA is the fact that we have integrated mental health care into the primary care practice. And so oftentimes what we find are veterans that have modest mental health care conditions are being treated inside the primary care team, and that's one of the ways that we improve access to care. I would say where we have veterans that are more significantly dealing with behavioral health challenges, one of the new tools, one of the new structures that's been rolled out across the department is the and I'm not going to remember the exact name. It's a structure where for the most seriously affected veterans, that there is a whole team of mental health care professionals that look at that veteran from a holistic standpoint. So it could be a psychiatrist, could be social worker, could be some group therapy provider that are all looking from a holistic standpoint at that particular veteran.
And I get you, that's probably best case scenario. So for the folks that come in my office, though, for the issues we have a very, very lack of mental health services. We have a lot of drugs being prescribed. And so what happens then? So our answer to that veteran is what? They call the 800 number for help. They call the helpline as a VA, as a veteran with all these drugs.
I would
What
hope
does
that
the VA do, though, when you find out that there's either excess drugs being written, lack of supervision, lack of doctor-patient involvement? Because this is real-time really happening. And then my second question is this, Secretary. When it comes to the prescription registries in individual states, like in the state of Indiana, there's a prescription registry that every single doctor, anybody prescribing any kind of heavy narcotic, turns into that state and it's monitored. Do the VAs have a procedure that is nationwide that says that they work with those state units and they do the reporting as well? or I think we had a piece of legislation last year that said that the VA may provide that to a state. Is that customarily provided to a state, or
my
is the VA
understand-
pretty much self-contained?
My understanding is that it is standard practice for us to participate in those state registries, and that's one of the ways that we're able to help improve the continuity of care for those veterans that are taking habit-forming drugs.
And if there's a doctor violating that in a state, what's the role of the veteran? Does the veteran call the congressional office and we call the VA when we know or have some kind of suspicion that there's something going on inside of a facility, overriding of prescriptions or lack of supervision?
It is, the focal point is the VA physician. I would tell you that as we have rolled out the opioid safety initiative all across the department, what we've built are dashboards for every single facility and every single physician that allow us to see at all levels of the organization the activity and intensity of
And has that led to
opioid
greater
prescription.
compliance, the dashboard? Has that led to greater compliance?
It has, yes.
Okay,
And
I appreciate that, and I-
reduced incidence of opioid prescription.
I appreciate that. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. O'Rourke, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here and for answering all of our questions, and I think perhaps just as importantly, listening to some of the concerns and suggestions on how we make improvements. I do want to make sure that this continues to be a collaborative relationship to the degree that it can with our oversight responsibility.
Yes,
and I got to tell you, I sympathize with the fact that you are managing, an all funds, all accounts budget organization that controls $156 billion, that has one of the most sacred responsibilities that this country has to fulfill. And you and Secretary McDonald, and actually you before Secretary McDonald, took this over at a time of unparalleled crisis. And so I'm trying to figure out what the balance is between the committee and the VA and the administration. I want to focus on outcomes. I want you to hit those things that are your commitment that I know you deeply believe in. I don't want to get into personnel issues in a $156 billion organization. And yet, because of the trust that was broken with this committee, with this country, with the veterans, the VSOs who represent them, I think it's very understandable that there's a heightened sensitivity on the part of the committee when we see a Diana Rubin's situation, when we see an egregious failure by a doctor or a prescriber in some part of the VA.
Yes, sir.
There's going to be an intensive focus on that to see if it signals that, in fact, we're turning the corner, or whether there are still systemic problems. And so just think it's important to say that. And one other thing is just another imperfect analogy. I was on the city council in El Paso for 6 years, and I was typically the dissenting vote on personnel issues that we would handle in executive session. The attorneys would always say, you know what, this employee whose violation was from the trivial to the more serious, it's much cheaper for us to settle with them, to put them in another job, to move them to the sanitation department instead of to fire them. I was always at one, or maybe joined by one other colleague, vote to spend perhaps 2 to 3 times what it would cost to keep the employee, to send a signal throughout the organization and hopefully change the culture that if you screw up here, you're out of here, and we'll take the extra expense. So just speaking for myself,
Yes, sir.
there's greater tolerance perhaps on the committee, but certainly with me, to spend a little bit more upfront to get the culture right, even if it costs us in legal proceedings and protracted proceedings to get these bad actors out of there.
Yes, sir.
I want to also commend you and the Secretary and the Undersecretary for Health for the excellent plan that you presented to us, I guess it was last month, the end of last month, to reform the way that care is delivered. And I would challenge the conclusion that you've reached that we will never be able to keep pace with demand. I think the plan that you presented, which maximizes what I think are the core competencies with the VA, with what we can have complementary in the community, can help us to see more veterans more effectively, more efficiently, and I think we can get closer to a more reasonable wait time. And so I hope that ultimately becomes your conclusion as well, or maybe I misinterpreted what you said.
I hope we deliver on the outcome you've just described.
Right.
The question will be, how do veterans respond with their demand for care? That's the, You know, if you fix demand, I'm confident that we can shorten wait times. Absolutely confident.
So I want to use this remaining year that you have and the administration has and the secretary has to leave those indelible changes that are going to ensure that this culture that we have to change, the performance we have to change, the outcomes we have to change, you're not going to get them all to where they need to be in this year, but I want to do the most possible within this year to get us as far along on the path as possible. To that end, and I know I didn't leave you a lot of time, in terms of going forward prospectively, when we're hiring, what are you looking for? What kind of decisions are we making in hiring so that we don't have these problems going forward, so that we're hiring the right people into the right culture for the VA?
I would tell you my own personal perspective, you look at values, will, and skill. And if you can't find people with the right that share your organizational values, if you have people that don't have the willingness to do the job, then it's a non-starter. People may or may not have the skill. In hiring, you expect that they will have the skill. But as we bring people into the organization, I didn't allude to this earlier, but in the majority of those instances where the IG did not find misconduct in locations where there were questions about scheduling, the conclusion was that people weren't trained. And if you look across VHA, there is no standard training for a medical support assistant. It's all over the board. We've tried to plug that problem by rolling out, many thousands of man-hours of additional training, but the ultimate solution is to roll out an enterprise-wide, and we've got one identified, 2-week, face-to-face, hands-on training program for schedulers. It's hard to justify firing somebody if you haven't trained them to do their job. So that's one of the obligations that we have. We agree that we need to hire the right person, but I would also tell you we've got to make sure that we do our part to train them to do the work.
Dr. Abraham, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Deputy, for being here, Ms. Flanz. I just want to kind of hit some points that you made during your opening statements. You alluded to that we need to have a little more patience. We need to get some more discipline established, and I think I could give you a good argument that both the veteran and this committee has the patience of Job waiting for these things to occur, so we're still waiting. And I want to appeal to your previous life as a leader of combat troops, leader of business. If you as a platoon leader had come to your company commander and say, if you had troops in contact and said, well, sir, give me more time and we need more discipline, the outcome would have been much more severe than the committee is doling out now. And I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that our veterans now are like troops in contact. The longer that they are having to wait, ravaged with disease, whether it be diabetes, heart disease, or anything, we are losing lives. And we don't mind patience to a point, but it's to the point now that daily our veterans are dying waiting for the VA, as you as a leader, to get these things done. Daily we know veterans are dying. And again, this is not making a better washing machine in business. These are actual lives we are dealing with. You alluded also in your statement that we need to look at more of the strategic, the broad, the long-term game, and I certainly agree with that. But again, going back as your role as a combat commander, if you didn't have tactical victories, the strategical long game meant absolutely nothing. So I guess the questions are two. One, you alluded to the IG report, and I'm a little concerned that I guess you do have the authority to usurp what the IG recommends, and I guess that's in your broad authority as Deputy Secretary and Mr. McDonald's as being Secretary. But is there a standard operating procedure, as Ms. Orlowski alluded to, as when you get these reports, do you have to do certain things in the objective checkbox, so to speak, as to, well, we've got to handle it this way, or can you go off on any road you want? And my second question, and then I'll leave you all the time you want to answer, you also alluded in your opening statement about the Mr. Frederick Harris, the VA employee that's been charged with manslaughter at the Alexandria Hospital in Louisiana. That's in my district. I would just ask what his current status is at the department right now.
If I can take that one first, I have no idea, but I assure you, before the day's out, I'm going to find out.
I'd appreciate that.
I'd be glad to let you know, too, because
I'd
I am as interested, I suspect, as you are.
Okay, thank you, sir.
If I can make one quick comment about sense of urgency, believe me that we have a sense of urgency.
And I don't argue that. Sloan.
As we waded into the access crisis, it was all hands on deck. We're focused on improving access to care. My comments earlier go to really reinforce that, to ensure that veterans that need care urgently are receiving care urgently. So,
and I think we just want to see some tactical victories.
believe me, we are, well, I'd say 7 million more completed appointments is at least a tactical victory.
But my veterans, again, I know the 4 and 5 days for primary care for mental health, but it's like you've heard here, when we go back in our districts, we don't have 1 or 2 veterans come up to us and say we're waiting. We have dozens that say, I cannot get an appointment. And this is what, and again, we throw our hands up in there and say, well, we're trying. Well, that's not good enough for our veterans.
And I agree with that. And in your part of the country, one of the things we've been doing is enhancing our facilities there so that we can provide more ready access to care. That's part of what, as a leader, I have to do, is to create the conditions that enable those frontline staff to meet or exceed the expectations of veterans. And we are, believe me, focused on doing that, focused on correcting the problems in care in the community, as we've discussed here 2 weeks ago, so that's a more effective tool as well to ensure that veterans are getting the care they need when they need it. So there is, believe me, a sense of urgency. Your question as it relates to IG reports, there are essentially always a set of findings or conclusions or recommendations that the IG has, and we have a discipline process where we go through and respond to those and provide regular updates to those. In the case of this particular instance, there were recommendations that the secretary or the undersecretary consider whether or not there is any appropriate accountability action that needs to be taken. And I can assure you, whether they recommended it or not, we would have been doing that anyway. The mechanism by which we do that oftentimes involves launching a separate investigation. I would tell you, in the particular case of the relocation, we found the information and the evidence that we needed in the investigative material that the IG gathered. So we did not have to go do a separate and independent investigation of those particular matters to move through a very deliberate process, but as expeditious as we can, notwithstanding the delay that we cost ourselves by our own administrative error, to get to the appropriate conclusion.
I'm out of time, but we are continuing to wait impatiently, as you
Yes,
know.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I understand.
Mr. Secretary, just for the record, we had written a letter to Secretary Shinseki back in 2013, and then I wrote a letter to Secretary McDonald in October of this year. Ms. Flanz, you may be aware of this in regards to that particular issue, and I haven't gotten a response on either, so I appreciate your willingness to dig into it and let us know what's going on.
I will do that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Waltz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Deputy Secretary, as always, thank you for being here. And
Yes, sir.
I thank my colleagues in building on what they're saying. I understand the complexity. Mr. O'Rourke is very clear about that, the complexity of your job, tens of thousands of personnel actions. We certainly don't expect, nor should, it would be not a good use of your time to be focusing on all those, but I think you're hearing it from my colleagues. There are times when that large systemic reform that we're all looking for is jeopardized, and it's the small chips and the things. And one of the things is that I think we do have a responsibility in this job to channel our constituents. And that's what you're hearing.
Yes.
My constituents say, when you see these guys, will you ask them this? And so while it may seem petty, it's not petty. Perceived reality is reality. And I have to say, I've tried to balance this accountability and due process, looking at pieces of legislation. As I heard, we didn't need the SES reform bill because you had all the tools. Well, apparently we did. Others have been offered that I've pushed back against, but it's challenging when I see this happen. I'm just trying to understand this latest issue. This was, every veteran in the country was watching this. We did an unprecedented step that pained us to issue subpoenas. We were told that there would be accountability, and now this plays out. And I have to tell you, my veterans have no faith that it's going to work. They don't believe this. And I'm just trying to understand, and in the midst of this for perceived reality, sending one of these people to Phoenix, of all places afterwards, can you take me through the personnel steps of how this unraveled? And I certainly understand things can happen, but in this one, this would have been one that I would have personally walked all the way through. If I'm just saying, because now we can't get at stuff, and I think there's reason to be optimistic. I agree with Mr. O'Rourke. That hearing last week was the best hearing we've had in this committee in 2 years. It was optimistic, it was visionary, it was getting at the heart of this. Veterans came up to me who watched it and said that they felt things were changing, and I haven't been more optimistic on electronic medical records and integration than maybe in 8 years that I am right now. There are important things happening, positive things happening for veterans, but it's all being undermined. So how did we end up in this mess? And yes, it's parochial. It's in my backyard. I made the case of this, and I promised my veterans there'd be accountability. You heard the frustrations. Maybe, and I let you, and as I said, Mr. You're the person who needs to do this because you have earned and have the trust and faith of folks. But right now, this thing is a mess.
As I've said before, my careful review of the entire body of evidence does not support the conclusions reached in the IG. Folks that have no familiarity with this case other than the report that they read from the IG, I can understand precisely why they share the concern that you are expressing right now. And I made the decision that I made with the full painful awareness that this was a decision that was not going to make people happy in any way, shape, or form. But I did what I believed was the right thing to do. And as I mentioned earlier, I look forward to coming back. I'll sit down with any member, come see you one-on-one if you'd like, or any other member one-on-one or the group in total, to walk through the decision process, walk through the evidence, and share the entire body of evidence, unredacted, all the evidence that was used to substantiate the decision that was made.
Well, that may be important because we've got to get this, and I've got to go back because you can't do that for each and every veteran. I've got to go back and stand in front of them, and I'm not interested in a witch hunt. I do believe that due process is important. It's a morale issue. It's a fairness issue that
yes,
people could. I can't pass judgment and judge, jury, and executioner on an employee of yours. I understand that. It's just a combination of things, and it appears like the lack of the sense of urgency. And I don't know how to convey that more to folks that this is changing because it is undermining veterans' faith in the really important critical work you're doing.
Can I thank you for raising that particular issue, and if I can mention 2 quick points. The first thing that I want to say to the entire committee, my personal perception has been and continues to be that historically VA did not consistently take appropriate disciplinary action in the face of misconduct or management negligence, period. We have not historically done that. That's one of the reasons I created the Office of Accountability Review, was because I did not have confidence that if I pushed those decisions out into the field that we would get the outcomes that we needed. There was a resetting and a recalibration of accountability actions and the process associated with that, and that's why I created the Office of Accountability Review. That's why I personally am the proposing and deciding official on every senior executive action, the serious actions for removal or removal from the senior executive service, because I am trying to model a leader's behavior and accountability for those leadership actions. And as senior executives see themselves being held to that account, to that standard, I'm hoping that then gets modeled elsewhere in the organization, and we certainly talk about it robustly. I agree with you that it takes too long. I agree with you that we're having to wait too long, and that is the impetus behind my decision to say we're not going to wait any longer. Where there is an issue, we knew that there was an issue around the relocation expenses months before the IG released their report. But what did we do? We waited for the IG to go through all the process. That's not how we're going to approach, and I'm telling you, we're already doing this. There are already AIBs underway, or OMI inspections underway, Office of Medical Inspector inspections that are underway right now. where we know that the IG is already in the facility, but we are in there as well. And I've said, please don't get in our way, because we're going to go in, we're going to gather what evidence we need. If we can do that cooperative with the IG, that's great. But we're going to move ahead. We're going to take the action that we can take. And if the IG comes back with a different finding and different evidence, fine. Then it'll give us the opportunity to consider any additional action.
Thank you, Chairman, for the extra time. And I would just, I know I'm not telling you anything new, Deputy Secretary, but boy, I would lean forward into this.
Yes, sir.
If you don't do it, I think you're going to jeopardize not only the public's trust in this, you're going to jeopardize the due process rights of others, because the hammer's going to come in a way that's not going to be helpful.
Yes,
So
sir.
I yield
Yes, sir.
back.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Shinseki resigned only after this, I think the White House saw that this committee unanimously voted to subpoena records related to, or communications related to the appointment wait time scandal. Then you had Secretary McDonald came in, really didn't make changes in the bureaucracy, became part of the bureaucracy, defended the bureaucracy. Problems have only really come to light through either whistleblowers or through things just blowing up. Then you had a president who, in the last State of the Union, after scandal, said of the VA, one sentence in the State of the Union speech. He said that the Veterans Administration has had some bumps in the road, but veterans are getting state-of-the-art health care. That was it. I think you're doing the best you can do. I think Secretary McDonald's doing the best that he can do, but you're both placeholders. And you don't have the authority from the White House. You don't have the support from the President to make the kind of changes that need to be made. You know what needs to be done. Secretary McDonald knows what needs to be done. But you absolutely don't have the support nor the authority to do so. So this agency of the federal government was in crisis when you came in. It will be in crisis when you leave. You give great spin here. I appreciate it. I really think you're trying to do the best you can do. But again, you absolutely have no support from the White House, no ability to make a difference. We'll just do the best we can between now and the next administration in terms of logging the problems. But if you take the issue, I mean, we had, in my district, the largest cost overrun in the history of the Veterans Administration and construction project. The problems were known since April of 2013 when there was a GAO report. Yet, even since then, the management on that project received bonuses. Nobody's been disciplined. The AIB has been done for 5 months, yet Congress has not received it. There's no confidence anymore in this committee. There's no confidence and trust among the veterans of this country, nor should there be. We're just treading water, and that's where it's going to be between now and the end. Can you tell me when the AIB is, when you're going to give it to the Congress, this committee, on the Aurora construction issue?
As I mentioned to Congresswoman Rice earlier, the plan had been to wait until the IG completed their investigation. We are not waiting. I have directed that we move ahead with the evidence that we have, and including that AIB, to consider any appropriate administrative actions on any employee that remains at VA. And we will do it. We are doing that right now. I expect that that's not going to take an extraordinarily long period of time, but I don't have an absolute deadline by which I have instructed folks to complete it. But it's relatively soon. We've waited too long for that already.
Mr. Chairman, I think that it's a tragic situation we're in right now. That the veterans of this country are not getting the benefits that they've earned, and the taxpayers are not getting the value of their hard-earned tax dollar. And I just don't see that changing between now and the next administration. I yield back.
Dr. Benishek.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks for being here, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Gibson. You know, I was a little disturbed by your written testimony as well. I don't think we really want to see people fired. We want to see the VA be successful. And frankly, it seems to me that we've come to the conclusion that the VA is unable to remove people that are not doing their job as we see it to be done. And I'm just going to give you one example that really kind of eats at me, and that is, you know, the Inspector General has told the VA 8 separate times over the last 30 years they need a central plan to hire physicians. And each time, the VA has agreed with the Inspector General that that is the case and that they're going to do it. But over 30 years, there is no plan to hire physicians centrally. They each are hired by each individual medical center, even today. And then in a subcommittee hearing, when I brought this up, they said, well, they might have a plan to do it in that plan in 3 years. So then I said, well, who's in charge of that? And I couldn't get an answer. So that is the accountability that we're talking about, and I'm talking about is that 30 years and this plan isn't done. And now you weren't here, but it's very frustrating to see that, and we want to see people who actually do the job and get these kind of things done, and I've got to assume that unless somebody's removed and somebody's made accountable to make that happen, all kinds of stuff like this aren't going to happen. So that's the frustration. I mean, last month, Danny Pummel, the Veterans Benefits exec, says it's almost impossible to discipline most VA employees. Do you agree with that?
I think there are processes that you have to follow, but I don't think it's impossible.
What can I do as a congressman? Is there something legislatively that we can do to make it easier for you to get this kind of stuff done?
The issue, particularly as it relates to serious disciplinary actions, has to do primarily with the evidentiary standard that we have to meet, because employees have the right to appeal those decisions. So when they're appealed, we appear before the MSPB, the Merit System Protection Board, and have to justify our actions based upon the evidence that was the foundation of those actions.
Well, it seems to me that you said this in the past, too, that it's very difficult to fire somebody in the VA. I mean, can we change this? I mean, I think I asked that question already, but you kind of give me like a long answers. I mean, what should be changed to make this easier?
I think there are processes that cut across the entire federal government that are associated, long established, and associated with disciplinary actions in the federal government that have lots of public policy implications associated with them, and we operate in that context. Some of the comments that were made earlier about ensuring that we have assigned the appropriate objectives and measurable goals that people need to have in their performance evaluation gives us the kind of quantitative information we need to be able to take that action.
Now, let me just go on, because I don't have much time, Mr. Gibson. I know you said repeatedly that the VA won't tolerate whistleblower retaliation. Has anybody been fired for whistleblower retaliation?
There have been, and I'll ask Meghan to correct me if I get it wrong, 10 instances of retaliators that have been disciplined, up to including removal.
All right. Can we find out who that is then? Because we're just not aware of any of that here, I don't think. Could you?
I believe that was one of the data points requested in a letter from the committee in October, and we compiled some data that's getting ready to come over to the committee.
All right. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, we weren't going to do a second round. If that's okay, we'll end with Ms. Brown and my closing comments. Ms. Brown?
Thank you. As we prepare to leave Washington, I know I'm getting ready to date myself here, but when I was coming up, it was a program on TV, Badge 714, and they used to say, "The facts, ma'am, just the facts." And I think that this is what you're trying to say to us, Mr. Secretary, not what you read in the paper or the rumor mills, but you have to make your recommendation based on the facts. Can you respond to that?
Yes, ma'am, you're right. Any deciding official is obligated to consider the evidence and only the evidence in taking a disciplinary action against a federal employee.
I also want to extend this comment to all of the veterans that might be listening. Under this administration, under this president, we have had the largest increase in VA funding in the history of the United States of America.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, this president haven't gotten the credit for it. And it was under this president and the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate. And I also want to extend seasoned greetings to General Saseki, who, he opened up the VA for additional people that did not have to prove their cases. And, but we as a Congress didn't beef up to give the VA the additional resources that they need to take care of it. So it's a blame game. But as we move forward, I do want to let the veterans know and the people that take care of our veterans that we appreciate them soldiering up, and that we need to let the veterans know and the people that work at the VA that we appreciate what they do to take care of our veterans.
Yes, ma'am. And I would add my own expression of gratitude both for the President's consistent and steadfast support of VA and veterans, and also this committee. This committee's steadfast support. I know we don't always see things exactly the same way, but I have never doubted the committee's motives and what are the ultimate objectives that we're trying to achieve here. And that's better outcomes for veterans.
And I agree with that, and I want to thank the chairman for his leadership on this committee. And in my last question to you, I am still concerned about the comments. Last night I went to the theater, and before I went in, they checked my purse.
Yes, ma'am.
I also, last weekend, went to a football game, and before I went in the football game, they checked my purse. In addition to that, I had to have a clear bag going into the facility. So I would like to know how we can begin the dialogue of hardening the VA facilities to make sure that we are proactive and that we don't have another incident, or we don't have an incident that we're sitting here talking about. What is it we can do to give you the assistance that you need to make sure that we take care of the veterans and the employees and make it a very safe place to work?
Yes, ma'am. What I would suggest is that perhaps we bring a couple of our key leaders over and walk through the comprehensive situation that we face and what some of the potential improvements are to the security posture of the department. Because it's something that we've been very focused on, particularly in the wake of what happened in El Paso. Before you got here, sir, I talked a little bit about what happened in Denver last week, where we had a much different and more positive outcome than we had in El Paso, fortunately.
Thank you again for your service, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Mr. Secretary, would it be inappropriate for Ms. Brown and I to invite the President to join us on a visit to the central office?
Sir, I can assure you that is your call.
I think we'll do that, because I've made the comment a couple times that he hasn't been to the central office and whether his schedule has allowed it or not. But we are all trying to resolve the issues that are out there. VA will never be perfect, and we don't expect you to be perfect. Anecdotal evidence is brought to us all the time. Somebody handed me a note a second ago about a combat helicopter pilot, Navy captain, PTSD for over 20 years in San Diego. His psychiatrist has left. He couldn't get his prescription renewed and was told that the next appointment he could get was 60 days. I mean, little things like that, can turn into a huge snowball. I'll get you.
Those are big things. That's not a little thing, that's a big thing, and I know you see it that way. Please let me know.
Well, we will get you the appropriate information.
Thank you.
And again, nobody on this committee expects you to be able to handle every single individual issue that's out there because some can't be handled.
Sure.
And Ms. Brown is correct. I used a curse word at the beginning because I was a little upset. I don't think you meant what you said, but maybe you did. But I would ask unanimous consent that you strike the word damn from the record and put dang, D-A-N-G. Hearing no objections, so ordered. And I think we can all agree from a political perspective that we want VA to be the very best that it can be. We want to give you whatever tools are necessary. The whole idea and the disciplinary side, it just looks like it is so hard to do it, whether it's reprimands. I mean, I've been looking at your list. I see reprimands that are appealed by individuals. And, you know, I saw one where somebody was going to be suspended for less than 14 days, and they left. They left the department. I mean, I don't get how that process works. If we can help streamline, and I know it's all across. It's not just VA. It's all across the federal government. It's not just your rules and regulations. But I would ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material. And without, Ms. Brown?
Yeah, just in closing, Mr. Chairman, I think it should be a bipartisan meeting with the president, and maybe we all could maybe go to the White House because of security or vice versa, but I think that would be a good thing to do.
Well, I think it's important that the president goes to the central office, and that's why I asked the issue. And if he can walk across the street for lunch, as he did a couple of weeks ago, he can certainly walk across the street to go to the central office. But it does need to be bipartisan, and all the members.
And I mean the Senate, I mean bicameral.
So,
Yeah, we need to invite the senators.
I don't know about the Senate.
Yeah.
just for the record, the president did come to the central office to announce Bob's nomination, so he has been there before.
Okay.
We're speaking of one of our town hall type meetings and discussions with him.
Yes,
And I
ma'am.
think that would be good for the country.
Okay, this hearing's adjourned.